Hey folks, this is Bryce and Tyler, and we are presenting on the FDA's actions to address the opioid epidemic, based on the eponymously titled presentation by Douglas Throckmorton, Deputy Director of Regulatory Programs at CDER, March 14, 2018. To start with background, opioid use disorder, or OUD, is very costly to the United States. Medicaid costs are around $10 billion per year. About two-thirds of overdose deaths involve opioid use as of 2018, and on average, an American dies of an opioid overdose in the States every 13 minutes. Looking at the opioid prescribing rates in the United States, we can see why some of these earlier stats are true. In 2012, there were an average of about 80 opioid prescriptions per 100 people. Fortunately, that number has dropped to about 50 prescriptions per 100 people, but those numbers are still very high, and disproportionately so in certain geographical areas of the United States. If you can see the black line at the bottom, you'll notice that only a small fraction of these annual opioid prescriptions were formulated to deter abuse. One of the main problems behind the opioid epidemic is that the pain for which patients are being prescribed opioids is real and widespread. Millions of adults report either temporary or chronic pain in their lives. Taking its constituents' needs into account, the FDA is tasked with, wherever possible, making what is necessary available and what is damaging unavailable. Its 4 priorities to do so are decreasing exposure and preventing new addiction, supporting the treatment of those with opioid use disorder, fostering the development of novel pain treatment therapies, and improving enforcement and assessing benefit risk.
So the FDA has 4 major priorities with regards to the opioid epidemic. The first of these priorities is to decrease exposure to opioids and prevent new addiction cases. These are some pretty broad goals, of course, but the FDA has specific roles that it plays here. These include helping to facilitate appropriate opioid prescriptions, especially with regards to appropriate dosage, duration of use, and labeling, examining opioid packaging, storage, and disposal, and taking action if drug manufacturers are not producing their drugs according to all required regulations, and also helping to prepare educational resources about opioids to be made available for physicians, nurses, pharmacists, and other relevant medical providers who might be prescribing or administering opioids. So these are all some of the important ways that the FDA might be involved in preventing opioid addiction.
The second priority of the FDA is supporting treatment for those with OUD. Naloxone is a current FDA-approved product used to combat overdose and has been so effective that the FDA has conducted its own research studies to optimize labeling guidelines for potential over-the-counter versions of it, incentivizing sponsors by performing some of the costly and time-consuming research upfront. Medication Assisted Treatment, or MAT, is also being supported by the FDA alone and in collaboration with the NIH, where new, trustworthy clinical endpoints and new, safe formulations are being researched, identified, and disseminated to potential sponsors and the public.
The third priority of the FDA with regards to the opioid epidemic is to help foster the development of novel alternative pain treatment strategies to help mitigate the need for opioids. Alternative strategies might include other drugs, such as neuropathic pain agents, muscle relaxants, and Percocets, as well as medical devices for reducing pain. But this may also include altering existing opioids to create abuse-deterrent formulations. Abuse-deterrent formulations are drug compositions that are designed specifically to be harder to abuse, such as by making extraction of the active ingredients more difficult, or by limiting methods of alternative administration. Of course, helping to nurture the development of such strategies requires a number of partnerships between the FDA and other organizations. These partnerships can take the form of FDA grants, public-private partnerships between the FDA and medical companies, and other collaborations across health and human services. And this here is a chart which demonstrates some of the alternative drugs that exist, which can sometimes be used in place of opioids. Typically, opioids themselves are used only for cases of more severe pain, but a major difficulty that arises here is that other drugs, such as NSAIDs, may not be sufficient for these more severe cases, so a challenge is to develop alternative drugs that can still treat severe chronic pain without the potential addictive properties of opioids.
The fourth priority of the FDA is improving enforcement and assessing benefit risk. To stop importation of illegal opioids, the FDA works with the U.S. Customs and Border Protection to inspect vital incoming shipment facilities around the U.S. Drug experts are also recruited for benefit risk assessment committees to facilitate FDA approval of only the safest new opioid products and formulations. Finally, the FDA is not hesitant to take action when it comes to recommending the removal of dangerous products from the market, as occurred in 2017 with Opana ER, a product that had become known for abuse and was removed after an FDA withdrawal recommendation.
In conclusion, the FDA has a number of roles to play in helping address the nation's opioid epidemic. These roles take on many different forms, including oversight of drug labeling, packaging, and disposal, assistance in the development of opioid alternatives and treatments for those with opioid use disorder, and enforcement of current regulations. What all of these roles have in common, though, is that they all center around a key focus: ensuring that patients have adequate access to pain treatments while reducing the risk of opioid use disorder. Finding a balance between these two things is a difficult task, and will require partnerships with many different organizations, both public and private. Thankfully, however, there are many organizations working to curb opioid addiction at the federal, state, and local levels, and collaboration efforts are already underway to help address these problems as efficiently as possible. And that concludes our presentation on the FDA's roles in addressing the opioid epidemic. Thank you for listening.